This is a story about a Mustang. It's about a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, one of only 857 built in 1969, one of 1,358 built across 2 model years, each one hand-assembled at a small subcontractor facility in Brighton, Michigan, called Kar Kraft. It's about a chassis number 9F02Z164892 that was punched into a Kar Kraft worksheet on April 14, 1969, by a sheet metal foreman named Donald Peterson, and which would not be referenced again in any official Ford Motor Company document for 57 years, until a fraudulent auction certificate appeared at Mecum Glendale in January of 2026, claiming that the same chassis number belonged to a different car. It's about Reuben Doc Hawthorne, a 51-year-old auto restoration specialist in Pembroke, North Carolina, who had been rebuilding the Mustang for 18 years and 3 months, and who had documented every component, every receipt, every Kar Kraft sourcing record, every original Magnum 500 wheel, every Ford-issued data plate, in a fireproof archive box that he kept in the back office of his garage. It's about Walter Pemberton III, a banking heir from Raleigh who, in March of 2026, decided that he wanted Reuben's Mustang for his Patriots collection of American muscle cars, and who hired a Charlotte attorney to manufacture a fake chassis history, claiming the Mustang in Reuben's possession was a stolen and rebadged 1969 Mach 1 worth 1/5 the price. It's about an 18-year restoration log, a handwritten letter from a Marine brother named Tyrese Strickland, the Kar Kraft sheet metal worksheets that survived in a barn in Brighton, Michigan, and a 50-year-old data plate that had been welded under the Cowl Panel by Donald Peterson in 1969, and which Reuben Hawthorne would extract in front of a federal forensic auto examiner on the morning of May 7, 2026. This is a story about a Mustang and the man who knew its chassis number by heart. Hawthorne Heritage Restoration sits on Union Chapel Road in Pembroke, North Carolina. The building is 1-story, concrete block, with a metal roof painted Marine Corps red and a hand-painted sign reading Caldwell. No, Hawthorne Heritage Restoration, Lumbee-owned veteran. Operated 1965-1973 American Muscle. Reuben Hawthorne does not advertise. His clients find him through the muscle car restoration community, Mustang Owners Club of America, the Boss 429 Registry, the Carolina Muscle Car Association, and he turns away more cars than he accepts. In the back bay of the garage on the morning of March 3, 2026, under a heavy white canvas cover that had been sewn by Reuben's mother in 2008, sat the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. The car was candy apple red, original factory color code 3D, applied at the Ford Dearborn Assembly Plant in March of 1969 before the body shell was trucked to Kar Kraft in Brighton, Michigan, for engine bay modification. The chassis number was 9F02Z164892. The number had been stamped on the driver's side door tag, on the inner fender apron, on the cowl-mounted data plate beneath the windshield, and visibly on a stamped steel reinforcement plate that Donald Peterson, the Kar Kraft sheet metal foreman, had welded under the cowl panel during the engine bay widening procedure. The Peterson reinforcement plate was undocumented in any factory literature. Only Kar Kraft workers knew about it. The plate carried a hand-stamped chassis number that was identical to the official chassis number, plus a Kar Kraft worker code, DP 1969077. Reuben Hawthorne had discovered the Peterson plate in March of 2008, the day he first lifted the cowl panel to inspect the front shock tower modification. He had documented it in his restoration log, photograph 47A. Page 14, March 23, 2008. He had not told anyone about it. The Mustang had been in the back bay of Reuben's garage for 18 years and 3 months. The original Ford-built 429 cubic-inch semi-Hemi V8 had been rebuilt twice. The top-loader 4-speed manual transmission was original, the 391 traction lock rear end was original, the competition suspension was original. Reuben had spent $41,300 of his own money on the restoration. He had compiled 3,146 receipts, organized chronologically in a fireproof archive box. The car was, in March of 2026, 91% complete. It was worth, according to the recent Haggard evaluation, between $350,000 and $660,000, depending on condition. The current world record for a 1969 Boss 429 was $660,000, set at Mecum, Indy in May of 2026. The Mustang in Reuben's back bay would, if completed and certified, exceed the world record. Reuben knew this. He had not told anyone. The Mustang had originally been purchased by a 22-year-old Lance Corporal in the United States Marine Corps named Tyrese Strickland from a Pembroke private seller named Ezra Locklear on October 20, 2007 for $4,500. Tyrese had towed the car home to his mother's house on Bear Swamp Road. He had begun the restoration on October 22nd. He had worked on it every weekend in November of 2007 with Reuben, his squad's master mechanic, helping him every Saturday afternoon. Tyrese deployed to Anbar Province, Iraq on November 12, 2007. He was killed by an improvised explosive device on November 24, 2007. He was 23 years old. Tyrese's mother, Margaret Locklear Strickland, had given the Mustang to Reuben on December 18, 2007, the day of Tyrese's funeral, along with a green Marine Corps footlocker containing Tyrese's personal effects, the car's original title, the bill of sale from Ezra Locklear, and a manila envelope marked November 11, 2007. Reuben had not opened the envelope in 18 years. He had opened the title. He had transferred the registration to his name in January of 2008. Witnessed by Margaret Locklear Strickland at the North Carolina DMV in Lumberton. The title had been clean. The transfer had been legal. Reuben had filed the original title and the transfer receipt in his fireproof archive box where they remained. He had begun the restoration on January 18, 2008. The bell over the front door rang at 10:15 on the morning of March 3, 2026. Reuben looked up. A man he did not recognize walked into the garage carrying a leather portfolio. The man wore a charcoal three-piece suit and a silk tie the color of NC State University red. The man said, "Mr. Hawthorne, my name is Cole Whitaker. I am an attorney with the law firm of Whitaker and Lockwood in Charlotte, representing Mr. Walter Pemberton III of Pemberton Holdings. We have something we need to discuss." Cole Whitaker opened the leather portfolio. He removed a stack of documents and laid them on Reuben's workbench. He said, "Mr. Hawthorne, we have evidence that the 1969 Ford Mustang in your possession is not a Boss 429. It is a 1969 Mach 1 that was repainted candy apple red, fitted with a replacement 429 cubic inch engine, and rebadged with a Boss 429 cowl data plate sometime between 1995 and 2007. The original Boss 429 chassis bearing the number 9FU2Z164892 was sold at Mecum Glendale in January of this year for $412,000 to my client, who is the current legal owner of the chassis and therefore the legal owner of the vehicle identity attached to that chassis. We are prepared to offer you $115,000 to surrender the vehicle to my client voluntarily, in recognition of the labor and parts you have invested over the years, on the condition that the matter is resolved by 5 o'clock this afternoon. After that, we will file a civil complaint for fraudulent conversion of property, criminal title fraud, and unjust enrichment, and the offer will be withdrawn." Cole Whitaker laid a glossy color photograph on top of the documents. The photograph showed a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 in candy apple red, photographed at the Mecum Glendale auction in January of 2020. 6. The vehicle's data plate was visible. The chassis number on the data plate was 9FO2Z164892. It was the same chassis number as the Mustang in Reuben's back bay. Cole Whitaker said, "I will see myself out, Mr. Hawthorne." He walked out of the garage. Reuben Hawthorne stood beside his workbench. He picked up the photograph. He studied the data plate in the image for 43 seconds. He said out loud to the photograph, "Whoever you are not a Boss 429. You are not 9FO2Z164892. I built 9FO2Z164892. I know what is welded under your cowl panel, and you do not have a Donald Peterson plate." He set down the photograph. He walked into the back bay. He pulled the white canvas off the Mustang. He picked up his cell phone. He called the only person in North America who would understand what the chassis number under the cowl panel of a Kar Kraft built 1969 Boss 429 was supposed to look like. The Boss 429 registry was founded in 1983 by a retired Ford Motor Company assembly engineer named Robert Perkins, who had worked at the Dearborn Assembly Plant from 1966 to 1981, and who had personally signed off on the body in white quality inspections for 231 of the 1,358 Boss 429 Mustangs produced. After his retirement, Perkins had devoted 4 decades to documenting every surviving Boss 429 by chassis number, engine number, transmission code, rear end code, original delivery dealer, original purchase order, and the unique Kar Kraft fabrication marks that distinguished an authentic Boss 429 from a Counterfeit. Perkins was 83 years old in 2026. He lived in Brighton, Michigan, in a small house 3 miles from the original Kar Kraft facility, which had been closed in 1970 and demolished in 1982. He maintained the Boss 429 registry from a wood-paneled basement office that contained, by his own count, 4,211 file folders, 37,000 original Kar Kraft worksheets that he had recovered from a barn in 1985, and a complete set of Donald Peterson's hand-stamped chassis cross-reference logs from 1969 and 1970. Reuben Hawthorne had been a registered member of the Boss 429 registry since 2008. He had submitted his initial documentation on chassis 9F02Z164892 on February 9, 2008. Photographs, original title, bill of sale, Kar Kraft data plate, engine number, transmission code, and a single photograph of the Donald Peterson reinforcement plate under the cowl panel. Robert Perkins had personally certified the car as authentic in March of 2008. Perkins' certification letter was in Reuben's fireproof archive box, filed under tab 7. Reuben called Robert Perkins on the afternoon of March 3, 2026 at 4:18 Eastern Time. The phone rang 4 times. A voice answered. Perkins, Reuben said. Mr. Perkins, this is Doc Hawthorne in Pembroke. I have a problem with chassis 9F02Z164892. There was a long silence on the line. Robert Perkins said, Doc, tell me everything. Reuben told him. He took 31 minutes. He read the Mecum Glendale auction certificate aloud. He described the photograph of the data plate. He described the offer from Cole Whitaker. He described the threat of civil litigation. Robert Perkins did not interrupt. When Reuben finished, Perkins said, Doc, I attended Mecum Glendale this past January. I personally inspected the car that sold for $412,000. The car was a 1969 Mach 1 with a replacement 499 engine and a counterfeit Boss 49 cowl data plate. The data plate was a high-quality reproduction, close enough to fool an auction house authenticator who was paid not to look carefully. I filed a formal protest with Mecum on January 22nd. Mecum dismissed the protest because the car had already been transferred to the buyer. The buyer was Mr. Walter Pemberton III of Raleigh, North Carolina. He paid in cash. He took possession of the car. I assumed the matter was over. Reuben said, Mr. Perkins, what about the Donald Peterson plate? Does the Pemberton car have one? Perkins said, Doc, the Pemberton car does not have a Donald Peterson plate. The Pemberton car does not have a Kar Kraft engine bay weld pattern. The Pemberton car does not have the inner fender apron stamp that we documented on every Boss 429 between chassis 9F02Z1641 and 9F02Z16495. The Pemberton car has none of these things because the Pemberton car is not a Boss 429. The Pemberton car is a 1969 Mach 1 with a fraudulent identity. The Boss 429 chassis 9F02Z164892 is in your garage in Pembroke, North Carolina. It has been there for 18 years. I certified it personally. The certification is on file. The matter is not over. The matter is just beginning. Reuben said, Mr. Perkins, the Pemberton attorneys are going to file civil and criminal charges against me at 5 o'clock this afternoon. They are going to say I am the one with the counterfeit chassis. They are going to use the Mecum certificate as evidence. What do I do? Perkins said. Doc, you drive to Brighton, Michigan. You bring the car. You bring every receipt. You bring the original title and the bill of sale. You bring the Lance Corporal's footlocker. We are going to do something I have wanted to do for 43 years. We are going to expose the Mustang chassis fraud network. I have been collecting evidence on this network since 1983. The Pembertons are not the first. They are not the worst, but they may be the last if we do this right. I will call the Federal Forensic Auto Examiner at the FBI Detroit Field Office. I will call the National Insurance Crime Bureau Auto Theft Division. I will call the Boss 429 registry membership. By the time you arrive, I will have a forensic team waiting. Drive carefully, son. Do not stop except for fuel. Bring the car. Reuben Hawthorne said, Roger that, Mr. Perkins. He hung up the phone. He walked to the back office of the garage. He opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. He removed the green Marine Corps footlocker. From within the footlocker, he removed the original title for 9F02Z164892, signed by Ezra Locklear and witnessed by Margaret Locklear Strickland on December 18, 2007, plus the manila envelope marked November 11, 2007, which he had not opened in 18 years. He opened the envelope. The letter inside, in Tyrese Strickland's familiar slanted handwriting dated November 11, 2007, said in part, Doc, the car is yours. Tell Mama I said so. She'll understand. Drive it when it is finished. The car is yours." Reuben folded the letter. He placed it in his shirt pocket. He walked back to the front bay. He hooked his Ford F-450 dually to a covered car trailer. He winched the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 onto the trailer for the first time in 18 years. He covered the car with the white canvas his mother had sewn in 2008. He drove out of the parking lot of Hawthorne Heritage Restoration at 5:47 on the afternoon of March 3, 2026. He drove northwest on Interstate 95, then west on Interstate 64, then north on Interstate 75 through North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, and into Michigan. He arrived at Robert Perkins' house in Brighton, Michigan, at 6:14 on the morning of March 5, 2026. 12 cars were parked on Perkins' street. 5 were unmarked federal vehicles. 2 were marked Brighton Police. The other 5 were Boss 429s. The forensic examination of chassis 9F02Z164892 was conducted in the climate-controlled garage of the Brighton Historical Vehicle Authentication Center, a facility owned and operated by the Boss 429 Registry on a former Kar Kraft warehouse lot on the morning of March 5, 2026. Present were Robert Perkins, 83, Boss 429 Registry founder, Special Agent Marcus Raleigh, FBI Detroit Field Office, Auto Theft and Fraud Unit, 16 years on the Federal Forensic Auto Fraud Beat, Dr. Helena Vogt, 48, lead forensic metallurgist, FBI Laboratory Quantico on temporary assignment to Detroit, Jameson Cole, 61, retired Director of Authentication, Mecum Auctions. 5 additional Boss 429 owners, each of whom had brought their own certified Boss 429 for comparative analysis. 2 reporters, Daniel Strickland of Robeson County Public Press, who had driven from North Carolina overnight, and Allison Tate of Hemmings Motor News, who had flown in from Bennington, Vermont. Reuben Hawthorne, alone in dirty jeans and a Hawthorne Heritage Restoration polo, having driven 36 hours straight from Pembroke, the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 chassis 9F02Z164892 candy apple red, 91% complete, was rolled off the trailer and into the forensic bay at 6:43 Eastern Time. Robert Perkins approached the car. He laid a gloved hand on the candy apple red hood. He stood there for 19 seconds without speaking. He said quietly to Reuben, "Doc." "She is beautiful," Reuben said. "Mr. Perkins, she is also documented." Perkins nodded. He turned to Dr. Helena Vogt. He said, "Dr. Vogt, please proceed with the cowl panel." The cowl panel of a 1969 Boss 429 Mustang is the metal panel beneath the windshield wipers that covers the upper firewall and the heater plenum. Removing the cowl panel requires the removal of the windshield wipers, the windshield washer reservoir, the cowl screen, and 23 sheet metal screws. The procedure takes approximately 14 minutes, Dr. Helena Vogt performed the removal in 11 minutes and 20 seconds, working under high-intensity examination lighting with a forensic photography assistant documenting every step. When the cowl panel was lifted away, the upper firewall and heater plenum of the Mustang were exposed. Welded to the upper firewall, at a 45-degree angle exactly 7 inches to the right of centerline, in a position that was invisible with the cowl panel in place and inaccessible without removing the cowl panel, was a small stamped steel reinforcement plate. The plate was 3 inches wide and 4 inches tall. The plate was identical in pattern, weld bead, and steel composition to 231 other Donald Peterson plates that Robert Perkins had documented over 43 years. Stamped into the plate in hand-applied steel dies were the following characters: 9F02Z164892 DP9969077. Robert Perkins removed his reading glasses. He wiped his eyes. He put the glasses back on. He said, "Special Agent Riley, this is a Donald Peterson plate. The chassis number matches the documented Boss 429 production records for April 14, 1969. The worker code DP1969077 corresponds to the 77th chassis Donald Peterson reinforced personally in 1969. I have Donald Peterson's handwritten daily log for that date in my archives. It will confirm the entry. This vehicle is the authentic 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, chassis 9F02Z164892. There is no question, Dr. Helena Vogt said. I concur. The weld pattern is consistent with hand-applied gas tungsten arc welding from a Lincoln Electric machine of the type used at Kar Kraft in 1969. The steel composition matches archived Kar Kraft inventory samples. The hand-stamped characters match Donald Peterson's known stamp die wear patterns. This plate has been in this vehicle for 56 years. It is original. It is authentic. The vehicle in this bay is the genuine 9F02Z164892. Special Agent Marcus Riley said, "Mr. Hawthorne, I am going to ask you to step outside for a brief private statement to camera while my team continues forensic documentation." "Mr. Strickland, Miss Tate, you are authorized to attend." Reuben Hawthorne stepped outside the forensic bay. He stood in the gravel parking lot of the Brighton Historical Vehicle Authentication Center. He said into the camera, in front of two reporters and Special Agent Marcus Riley, "Mr. Pemberton, the Donald Peterson plate has been welded under my cowl panel since April 14, 1969. Robert Perkins certified it in 2008. The FBI just verified it. Your car has no Peterson plate. Your car is not a Boss 429. The Mustang is mine." Daniel Strickland recorded the statement. It was 46 words. Allison Tate filed her story with Hemmings Motor News at 7:52 that morning. The headline read, "FBI verifies Pemberton Boss 429 is counterfeit. North Carolina restorer owns real car. Kar Kraft Registry exposes 40-year chassis fraud network." The federal investigation into Mustang chassis fraud, opened by Special Agent Marcus Riley of the FBI Detroit Field Office on the afternoon of March 5, 2026, was not the first such investigation. It was the seventh. The previous 6 investigations, conducted between 1991 and 2022, had exposed individual counterfeit cars but had never identified the network responsible for producing high-quality fraudulent chassis identities for the American muscle car auction market. This time was different. This time, Robert Perkins had a complete 43-year archive of every counterfeit Boss 429 identification he had ever made, cross-referenced with auction records, ownership histories, and the small number of skilled metal workers in North America capable of producing convincing counterfeit Kar Kraft data plates. The Perkins archive identified 4 primary counterfeiters: a retired Ford foundry worker in Dearborn, Michigan, who had produced approximately 23 counterfeit Kar Kraft data plates between 1991 and his death in 2014, a still-active machine shop in Mooresville, North Carolina, which had produced approximately 41 counterfeit chassis identifications since 2005, primarily for clients in the Carolinas, Virginia, and Florida, a custom fabrication shop in Hayward, California, which had produced approximately 17 counterfeit identifications for West Coast clients since 2007, and a single individual, a former Kar Kraft contract welder named Edward Vance, age 73, living in Brighton, Michigan, who had personally produced 104 counterfeit Boss 429 chassis identifications since 1983, and who lived 4/10 of a mile from Robert Perkins' house. Special Agent Riley's team executed federal search warrants on all 4 locations on the morning of March 8, 2026. The Mooresville machine shop yielded 41 work orders dating to 2005, including a work order dated October 14, 2025, for the production of a Boss 429 data plate, engine number stamping, and inner fender apron stamping with the chassis number 9F02Z164892, billed to a client identified only as WP3 Raleigh. The same work order included a notation in the machinist's handwriting. Customer claims original car is in Pembroke, NC at Lumbee Veterans Shop. Customer wants identity match for upcoming auction. Rush job, premium price. Walter Pemberton III was arrested at his Raleigh residence on the morning of March 11, 2026. The Mooresville machinist was arrested the same morning. He pled guilty to federal title fraud charges on March 24 in exchange for cooperation. He provided testimony identifying 11 additional Pemberton-connected counterfeit chassis transactions dating back to 2015. The Hayward fabricator was arrested on March 15. He pled guilty on April 2. Edward Vance was indicted on March 18 on 104 counts of federal wire fraud, title fraud, and trafficking in counterfeit automotive components. He pled not guilty. His trial was scheduled for September of 2026. The aggregate value of counterfeit Mustang chassis transactions identified by the Riley investigation, dating from 1983 to March of 2026, exceeded $140 million. The Pemberton civil complaint against Reuben Hawthorne was withdrawn on March 12. A federal countersuit, filed by Reuben Hawthorne on March 15 on behalf of himself and the Boss 429 Registry, sought damages from Walter Pemberton III and from Pemberton Holdings' personal assets for fraudulent civil litigation, malicious prosecution, and conspiracy to commit title fraud. The case was assigned to Judge Anita Ramirez of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina. Settlement negotiations began on April 22nd. The settlement was finalized on June 2nd, 2026. Walter Pemberton III paid $4,200,000 to Reuben Hawthorne in damages, of which Reuben designated $2,800,000 to a trust for Naomi Hawthorne's undergraduate and medical school education at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke and beyond, $800,000 to the Boss 429 Registry Endowment Fund to be administered by Robert Perkins for the continued documentation and authentication of surviving Boss 429 Mustangs, $200,000 to the Carolina Muscle Car Association Youth Restoration Apprenticeship Program in Robeson County, North Carolina, $400,000 retained by Reuben to complete the restoration of chassis 9F02 Z164892 to concours correct condition. Walter Pemberton III pled guilty to federal title fraud, wire fraud, and malicious prosecution on July 8, 2026. He was sentenced on September 11th to 9 years in federal prison. The counterfeit Boss 429 he had purchased at Mecum Glendale for $412,000 in January was federally seized as evidence and was later destroyed by court order. Cole Whitaker was disbarred by the North Carolina State Bar on July 22nd. Robert Perkins issued a formal updated certification on the genuine chassis 9F02 Z164892 on June 15, 2026, in a ceremony attended by Reuben Hawthorne, 23 additional Boss 429 owners, and Special Agent Marcus Raleigh. Perkins handed Reuben the certification document. He said, "Doc, 43 years. This is the cleanest authentication I have ever issued. You documented every component. You found the Peterson plate. You did not move the car. You did not panic. You called me. You drove 36 hours straight. You let the federal team do their work. You are an example to every restorer in this country," Reuben said. "Mr. Perkins, I just wanted to finish Tyrese's car." Perkins said, "Son, you finished Donald Peterson's car too. Donald died in 1986. He would have been proud." Reuben Hawthorne drove the trailer with the Mustang back to Pembroke, North Carolina, arriving on June 20th. He had 9% of the restoration left to complete. He completed it in 5 weeks. The final 9% of the restoration of chassis 9F02 Z164892 consisted of the following items: the installation of the new Edelbrock high-lift camshaft from the brown box on the top shelf of Margaret Locklear Strickland's storage closet, the camshaft Tyrese Strickland had ordered in October of 2007 before deploying to Iraq, the completion of the transmission shift linkage that Tyrese had begun fabricating on a Saturday afternoon at Reuben's bench in November of 2007. Tyrese had finished the bearing plate, the pivot bracket, and the lower linkage rod. He had not yet machined the upper linkage rod. Reuben machined it in July of 2026 on the same lathe Tyrese had used 19 years earlier, to the dimensions Tyrese had penciled into a notebook on a Saturday afternoon long before Iraq. The polishing of the original Magnum 500 wheels, 5 wheels, each requiring approximately 14 hours of hand polishing to factory correct, mirror finish. The installation of the rebuilt 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 into the engine bay, with new gaskets, new freeze plugs, new motor mounts, and a final torque check of every fastener to factory specification. The installation of the rebuilt top-loader 4-speed manual transmission, with new bearings and seals into the bell housing. The hookup of the rebuilt 391 traction lock rear end to the drive shaft with new universal joints. The installation of new factory specification F60B15 Goodyear tires on the polished Magnum 500 wheels, the reinstallation of the windshield wipers, the cowl screen, the windshield washer reservoir, and the cowl panel over the Donald Peterson plate that had now been documented, certified, and federally protected as authenticating evidence in 7 different federal cases. The first start of the rebuilt 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 in the engine bay of the completed Mustang occurred at 9:53 on the morning of July 3, 2026. Reuben Hawthorne stood at the front of the car. Naomi Hawthorne stood at the rear quarter panel beside the driver's side door, holding a stopwatch. Reuben turned the ignition key. The engine cranked twice. It fired on the second crank. The Holley 780 CFM 4-barrel carburetor, the original carburetor that had been rebuilt by a specialist in Cleveland, Tennessee in 2023, settled the idle at 620 revolutions per minute, exactly as specified in the original Ford service manual for the Boss 429. The sound of the engine, the long, irregular, hand-built rumble of a Boss 429 semi-Hemi at idle, filled the back bay of Hawthorne Heritage Restoration. Reuben stood beside the car. He listened. He did not speak. He did not cry. Naomi clicked her stopwatch. She said after 1 minute and 47 seconds of idle, "Daddy, the cam timing is perfect. The carburetor is rich at idle by approximately 2 degrees. We can lean it out after warm-up." Reuben smiled. He said, "Naomi, you are going to be a hell of a doctor, but you are also a hell of a Mustang mechanic." He shut off the engine. He walked to the back office. He picked up Tyrese Strickland's footlocker. He carried it to the front bay. He set it on the workbench. He removed Tyrese's letter from his shirt pocket, where he had been carrying it since March 3rd, and he placed it in a frame that he had purchased from a frame shop in Lumberton the previous week. He hung the framed letter on the wall above the workbench, beside his Marine Corps gunnery sergeant chevrons. Below the framed letter on a small brass plate, he had engraved the following inscription: Chassis 9F02Z164892, April 14, 1969, July 3, 2026, built by Kar Kraft, restored by Hawthorne for Lance Corporal Tyrese Strickland. You see, the drive is done. Reuben Hawthorne stood in front of the framed letter for 19 minutes. He did not cry. He had not cried in 19 years. He still did not cry. He went home to Pembroke. He had dinner with his daughter. He slept. The next morning, he drove the Mustang in the Lumbee Homecoming Parade. The Lumbee Homecoming Parade was held on the morning of July 4, 2026 in Pembroke, North Carolina. The parade was led by the Lumbee tribal chairman in a black Ford Expedition. The second vehicle in the parade was the Miss Lumbee pageant winner in a white Ford Mustang convertible. The third vehicle, directly behind the Miss Lumbee pageant car, was a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 candy apple red, chassis 9F2Z164892, certified authentic by the Boss 429 Registry on June 15, 2026. The driver was Reuben "Doc" Hawthorne, in a clean Marine Corps gunnery sergeant dress uniform. The passenger was Naomi Hawthorne in her mother's burgundy dress. The Ford 29 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 idled at 620 revolutions per minute as the parade moved down Union Chapel Road at 15 miles per hour. When the parade passed the house at the corner of Union Chapel Road and Bear Swamp Road, where Margaret Locklear Strickland sat on the front porch holding a small American flag, Reuben slowed the Mustang to 10 miles per hour. He revved the engine once, gently, for 3 seconds. The unmistakable sound of a hand-built Boss 429 semi-Hemi at full song carried across the porch, across Bear Swamp Road, and into the cornfield behind the Strickland house. Margaret Locklear Strickland closed her eyes. She did not wave. She did not call out. She nodded once. Reuben Hawthorne put the Mustang back in first gear. He let out the clutch. The Mustang moved forward. It moved past the Strickland house, past the campus of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, where Naomi would begin her undergraduate studies. In 7 weeks, past the storefronts of downtown Pembroke, past the boat ramp on the Lumbee River, where the dark water moved slowly south toward the South Carolina border. The parade ended at the staging area on Prospect Road. Reuben Hawthorne parked the Mustang. He shut off the engine. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time. Naomi sat beside him. Finally, Naomi said, "Daddy, the Mustang is finished." Reuben said, "Yes." Naomi said, "Uncle Tyrese asked you to drive it past Mama Strickland's porch. You did." Reuben said, "Yes." Naomi said, "Are you going to be okay?" "Daddy." Reuben Hawthorne, 51 years old, retired gunnery sergeant, United States Marine Corps, restoration specialist, single father, Lumbee, sat in the driver's seat of a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 that he had restored for 18 years and 9 months, listening to the cooling ticks of a hand-built 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 that had not run for 19 years and had run for less than 30 minutes total in 2026. He looked at his daughter. He said, "Naomi, the car is done. The promise is kept. The Lumbee are 575. The chassis fraud network is broken. Mr. Perkins has his cleanest authentication in 43 years. Your mother is at peace. Your Uncle Tyrese can rest. And I have a daughter who is going to be a doctor, who already knows that the carburetor is rich at idle by 2 degrees. I am going to be okay." Naomi reached over. She took her father's hand. The 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8 ticked quietly as it cooled. Across the parking lot, a small group of Lumbee children gathered around the Mustang, pointing at the candy apple red paint, the chrome Magnum 500 wheels, the polished bumpers, the badge on the front fender that read Boss 429. One of the children, a boy of perhaps 8, wearing a small Marine Corps t-shirt, said loudly enough for Reuben to hear, "Mama, that is a real Boss 429. I want to build one when I grow up." His mother said, "Maybe you will, baby, maybe you will." Reuben Hawthorne, sitting in the driver's seat with his hand in his daughter's hand, listening to the cooling ticks of his Mustang, and the voices of Lumbee children. Admiring the car he had built, did not cry, but he smiled. It was the first time Naomi Hawthorne had seen her father smile in 7 years. In the back bay of Hawthorne Heritage Restoration on Union Chapel Road, the white canvas cover that Reuben's mother had sewn in 2008 lay folded on the workbench, never to be needed again. On the wall above the workbench, beside the Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant chevrons and the framed letter from November 11, 2007, hung a third item, a brass plaque engraved with the certification of authenticity from the Boss 429 Registry. Chassis 9F02Z164892 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 Kar Kraft. Brighton, Michigan, April 14, 1969 Donald Peterson Plate, DP 1969-077 restored by Reuben Hawthorne, Pembroke, North Carolina completed, July 3, 2026 certified authentic. Robert Perkins Boss 429 Registry for Lance Corporal Tyrese Strickland, USMC. The drive is done. The Mustang sits in the back bay of Hawthorne Heritage Restoration. It will never be sold. It will be driven once a year in the Lumbee Homecoming Parade by Reuben Hawthorne until he is no longer able to drive. After that, it will be driven by Naomi Hawthorne, MD. The drive is done, but the Mustang is just beginning.